So Bill O'Brien gets fired. I mean, kind of been like a little bit of a running joke, right? Like Bill O'Brien likes Bill O'Brien so much, you get Bill O'Brien a raise. And Bill O'Brien appreciates that Bill O'Brien gave Bill O'Brien a raise, so then he's going to make Bill O'Brien the play caller. There's a lot of B.O.B. Bill O'Brien. And here's what you're going to hear immediately on social media. Okay? Wow, you got to hire Eric Bieniemy. Got to do it. Right? Got to hire Eric Bieniemy. Now, I think Eric Bieniemy could be good potentially. Keep in mind, he's not the play caller with the Kansas City Chiefs. But I've also talked to some people who played when he was a running backs coach at other stops, that he's not necessarily an X's and O's guy, but a very good motivator guy and probably tough, hard-nosed, former tremendous player guy. But these things go hand in hand in regards to who you're going to hire. If you fire the GM and you fire the coach and they're one and the same person, whoever you hire as the GM is going to want to bring in his guy. Now, if you go to Kansas City and you hire Brett Veach's, right-hand guy, or, you look around the league and you say, who has Kansas City ties that we want, that might work. Might work. But if you really, there's just so many people who don't understand how the business actually works. Okay. And Brett Veach is a young dude. He's like 40 years old. You're going to reach out and get who? You're going to get one of his assistants who have never done it before, and then you're going to hire a head coach who's never done it before. That can work, or it might not. And then you also have to give them benefit of the doubt of some of the things you want as a general manager, they don't have. They don't have first-round pick this year. Right? Like, good, you got Laramie Tunsil. You better make that work. You better make Deshaun Watson work and hope he doesn't get hurt again. So what we have a tendency to do is Chiefs offense, awesome. Eric Bieniemy should get job. And maybe he does. Maybe this is the job he gets. I do think there'll be other jobs available. I think on paper, Deshaun has some of the attributes of a Pat Mahomes, a lot of the attributes of several other successful quarterbacks within Kansas City's style of offense. But we should also this is really important to point out. This offense is used in Philadelphia. How's that going? This offense is used in Chicago. How's that going? Right? Like, those are the same systems and all guys from the same coaching tree. It doesn't mean it won't work. Deshaun Watson clearly better than whomever you have executing it in Chicago, whomever you have executing it in Philadelphia, even Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz is pretty good. Now, part of it is they have massive injuries. But we make this assumption like, well, Eric Bieniemy, who's not calling plays, but we know we assume he'll run the Kansas City system. Who's his general manager? And oh yeah, by the way, if that system was so amazing, why doesn't it work elsewhere? Answer that for me. This is no different than the Patriot thing. No different than the Patriot thing. Because if you're honest, Josh McDaniels is actually way more qualified than Eric Bieniemy. Not close. He's been a head coach. He did fail in Denver. He came back. He's been marvelous, not just with Tom Brady, but now with Cam Newton, devising a completely different scheme, which has been successful thus far. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens next. And you have an elite quarterback, but who do they pick in terms of their personnel people? Who do they pick atop their franchise pecking order? Once that happens, now all of a sudden you start to understand that's how decisions are made in this league. Not the let's just go get flavor of the month. Texans offense is 29th in points per game. The only teams worse are the three worst teams in football: the Jets, the Giants, and the Washington football team. Ryan Music, you had some stuff on Bill O'Brien you want to share with me?
Yeah, well, so another candidate I was thinking about was a hot name from last season that sort of fits the profile of Deshaun Watson. What about Ravens offensive coordinator Greg Roman? And everyone's talked about the success that he had with Colin Kaepernick going back to San Francisco. Now what he's done in Baltimore with Lamar Jackson. I don't know what you were saying with the general managers and who they might hire and where everything sort of crosses paths there. But he seems like he would be a great fit for the type of player that Deshaun Watson is.
Yeah, I don't know if Deshaun's that guy anymore, though. That's one of the things with Deshaun Watson is like, I think he believes that he's evolved past that quarterback and he's a pocket guy. And I'm not sure I think you're more right, but I also think, you wonder, is he going to get him killed? Right. And do they have the running game for that? Do they have the offensive line for that? There's a lot of things in that system which you have to have just right before you can just, hey, let's run this. Now you'd have some sort of carte blanche with no general manager to bring in your guy, and Baltimore's a very well-respected front office. But I think it's really interesting. I think it's a very interesting thought.
And it sort of feels like, other than, Bill Belichick in New England, I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg argument. I don't know if Bill O'Brien, the head coach, got the GM fired, or if Bill O'Brien, the GM.
Joe O'Brien, the GM, got the head coach fired.
Okay.
Why not Byron Leftwich?
That's true, yeah.
Like, it does depend on what type of quarterback. I understand that people look at Deshaun, they see Mahomes, and look at Mahomes and see some of Deshaun. They're both college stars. Deshaun was more of a runner in college than Pat Mahomes ever was. But I do understand. I understand it. I get it. I would also tell you, though, that there's a lot more way. There's more than one way to do it. And, Byron Leftwich is an interesting candidate. So, and he'd be young and he'd surround himself with other dudes. But I think it's part of this kind of knee-jerk, Eric Bieniemy for every job. Like, okay, well, who's doing the interviewing? Does he jibe with McNair? Who's the general manager? Do they have a relationship? Do they have trust automatically built in? That's my kind of 2 cents.
Do you still feel as though that they did the right thing by, going for maybe overpaying for a Laramie Tunsil? And
I didn't think they did the right thing at the time, no, but I think that was the inexperience as a general manager. I don't know what the other bids were for Laramie Tunsil. I felt like 2 first-round picks is a lot. And now you run the risk of you fire the head coach, and if things go really, really south, now that pick looks great, even better for Miami. I'm a volume of picks sort of guy. When you're trying to revive a program, now the problem is that they felt like they had their star quarterback. They had so many other pieces in place. They just needed to solidify that line, and that was a quick fix. The problem with quick fixes are, it does kind of limit some of your other flexibility. Yes, Dan Byer.
In these days, and you talk about those picks, and that's where I think it's interesting because, you've talked so much about the Bears-Raiders Khalil Mack deal, and a lot of times it's brought up on how the Seahawks recently traded 2 firsts for Jamal Adams, and now you bring up the Tunsil deal as well. The Seahawks in those 3 deals were really the only team that you could probably say, this team's probably going to pick around between 20 and 32 because of Russell Wilson as their quarterback and maybe the pieces that they've got around. Even with Deshaun Watson as the quarterback there was no guarantee that this was going to be a constant playoff team where you're always picking, for surely in the last half of the draft. And I think that's part of why, we sit there, not all first-round picks are created the same. And when you're Bill O'Brien and making those moves and giving it away, there was, you think that you are going to be in that back third. But I think realistically, when we look at the NFL and how it's set up, maybe the Seahawks were the best set up to be like, all right, well, the first we're going to be giving the other team will be later on in the draft. To your point about, now these first-round picks are seeming better and better for the Dolphins, or even, for the time being with the Raiders head with Mac.
I actually just texted with this guy is director of player personnel at the NFL, and I was with one of the teams in the NFL, and I said, kind of asked that question: is it possible Deshaun Watson isn't as good as we think? And he's like, it's very possible. Check the tape. That's what he said. So now he is not with the Texans, and I won't divulge the name of the team. But we make this assumption that it's all the coach and all the coach's moves. And, it's really interesting that no one ever says boo about Deshaun. I like Deshaun Watson. I like Deshaun Watson a lot. let's not act like he's been tearing it up this year. Right? So, I mean, he came in with an amazing reputation and lived very much up to it. But he's been very average this year. Very average. Coming into the Minnesota game, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, thrown for on average about 260 yards. Like, in a league where everyone else's offense is taking off to start the year and the defense is slow to catch up, his offense hasn't been doing that well. Now, is that all his fault? Of course not. Facing 3 of the best defenses in the league, and he's working in some new pieces, totally makes sense. But we make this assumption that Deshaun Watson he's not in that category of the elite quarterbacks. He's just not. He's really good, and he is a big play maker. But he holds the ball a little bit too long. He tries to be a little bit too creative. I don't know. It's going to be fascinating that they bailed, 4 games into a season where the playoffs have been expanded. Maybe that's the most interesting part of the entire thing.
It does sort of feel like a really bad combo of the strength of their schedule in those first 3 games. Then you add into the fact that I think the Vikings loss was clearly very disappointing on paper, that they entered the game looking as bad as they did, and to lose to the Vikings was clearly what was the last straw for the ownership. But when they traded away DeAndre Hopkins, it was such a Twitter storm of how could you ever consider doing that? And you would think that if we speak so highly of Deshaun as we do, you should be somewhat better to overcome just losing 1-star wide receiver, similar to what you've said about guys like Russell Wilson or even Tom Brady in the past, where, yeah, having a stud wide receiver obviously helps, but they seem to sort of elevate the pieces regardless of who's been sort of around them throughout their careers.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. That's kind of what we're talking about with Dak Prescott. We're not holding Deshaun Watson to that same what's the word I'm looking for? Standard. We're just not. Right? Like Brady's never started 0-4. Aaron Rodgers never started 0-4. Russell Wilson's never started 0-4. Pat Mahomes never started 0-4. I mean, kind of go through it and just start to think about who's started 0-4. Now, do you put it all on him? Absolutely not. But this is one of those, you deserve, if you're going to get all the credit when you win, you're going to get some of the blame when you lose. But that's not what we're doing with Deshaun. Go ahead, Byer. You want to hear your voice.
I'm sorry you heard me breathing, because the part of the Hopkins deal, like if you think about like where the Texans are right now, if they just the defense of Bill Bryan was his contract demands were too high, but they didn't have to pay him right now. And I think that when you look at the trade, and I actually didn't think it was as bad at the time, and thinking like, okay, this is what they're going to try to do. But if you look at what it was, if they would have just let DeAndre Hopkins leave via free agency, just be like, all right, we're not just going to, he's going to play out his contract. I almost think that the blowback would have been less than considering what they actually got in return. Or like you could just make the decision of like, we just didn't think the guy had anything left or wasn't worth it. But then when you see what you actually put the worth on it of doing the deal, like they could have had DeAndre Hopkins for this season. They really could have.
I don't know if that's true. Remember, DeAndre didn't want to show up in Arizona until he got a new deal.
True, but
so
the new CBA would fine him for not showing up after 5 games. And
understood, but we don't. There was something about that relationship. Now, look, maybe this is a Bill O'Brien thing. But there was something about that relationship where he likely felt this guy is not showing up if I don't give him a new deal. And he didn't feel good doing it. I like DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know about his practice habits and all that other stuff. I still think he can ball out. He looked good the first 2 weeks in Arizona. He's leveled off since. So I don't know, but you're also operating under the assumption there could have been this relationship is over. Figure it out. Here's where I'll defend him in terms of what he got back in return. Do you think he was going to trade him for something less than was offered? You sell him to the highest bidder. That's what you do. That was the highest bid that they got.
That was the problem, because then Stephon Diggs was dealt to the Bills for a first-round pick.
Sure. But Diggs was in a different place contractually. He's in a different place in terms of his career age-wise. Right?
The contract, I can't think off the top of my head of what
Diggs
the
signed a
ages
new
were.
deal a couple of years ago, maybe
Well,
even last year.
He just got his new deal, didn't
Yes,
he?
but,
Yeah. I mean, Hopkins is now the second highest paid wide receiver in the NFL.
Sure.
Behind Cooper's $20 million, I believe.
Yes.
So that's like
Okay, well, what's Hopkins making, Ryan Music? This is Stephon Diggs. His contract currently, he's making. He's in the third year of his contract. He's going to make 14.8 this year, and then he makes 11.6 next year, and they can get out of it for nothing, or for $3 million in dead cap money they can get out of it for, and then 11 and 11. So he'll probably be renegotiated at the end of next year. So he was a different place in his contract. Where was Hopkins in his deal?
Hopkins just signed that extension, which, as Dan Beyer said, basically makes him one of the highest paid in the league at wide receiver. He gets on average 27. He got a $27.5 million signing bonus. $60 million of it was guaranteed. So over the next few years, because it was technically an extension, he only made $1 million in base this year with $5.5 million, but then it goes all the way up to 19.4 and 14.9 by 2023, 2024.
So that's kind of my point, Dan. Is that there's it's like the Khalil Mack thing. It wasn't just that they were trying to trade Khalil Mack and get 2 first-round picks. It's that they didn't want to pay the $90 million guaranteed. It wasn't just that they felt like they needed to move on from from Nuke Hopkins. It was that they knew what he wanted contractually, and they're like, that doesn't make sense for where we are. Right? We got to play left tackle, we got to play quarterback. We can't pay wide receiver that money and form a team.
Yeah, but he was. I mean, I just think he had a couple of years left on his deal.
Yes, he did. Yes.
So that's just the point that I'm bringing up. Of you could have just said, we'll pay him what his old deal was, which was 5 years, $81 million that went through 2022, and just let him walk. But now you do a deal that brings back David Johnson and these other pieces, and you're like, wait a second here. I mean, you could have still had him on this team, and he would have you signing your left tackle. It doesn't add up necessarily to me. And he and Diggs are only, he's 1 year older than Diggs, so it's not like Hopkins is riding off to the sunset.
Sure.